Vigdis now sat at home at Vaden, and was so full of sorrow that nothing could cheer her. She hardly cared to take food or drink, to dress herself or comb her hair. Never could she take her thoughts from the wrong Vigaliot had done her. Every night she dreaded going to bed, with these thoughts for company, but towards morning she dreaded rising again to face the long day to be spent in working and chatting with others. She said to herself, "Now I am like a bird that lies on the ground fluttering its broken wings. It cannot move from the spot where it has fallen, and it cannot see farther than the stream of its own blood. If I think upon what used to be, I remember only what is now. If I recall the time when I lived here blithe and carefree, it seems it was only that this might come upon me." Often she thought it would be best if she went and lay down in the river. Winter was now on the wane, and she found she was with child. One night when she lay awake, while Asa and the other women slept, she got up, put on a cloak, and went out into the yard. She took the downward path leading to the river. Vigdis had never before been out at night alone, and it seemed to her more dismal than she had thought possible. It was the time of the equinox, with much wind and rain, so dark that she could not distinguish earth from sky. But now and again there was a rift in the clouds, and stars came out. She had not gone far before she felt she had strayed from the path into the fields, but could not see where she set her foot. At times she waded through drifts of melting snow, or one foot would plunge down into a hole, but for the most she found a slippery frozen surface, for the snow had been washed off the ground, where it had sloped down to the Frischa. After a little while she could not tell where she was, or where was the river, and where the manor. Vaden lay close to the stream, but in the darkness it seemed an endless journey. At last she slipped on the frozen ground and slid down until she came up against something and threw her arms around it. She guessed it to be a fir tree, as the branches scratched her face, but as she slid down she could feel that the child moved within her. Vigdis crouched under the snow. She was as wet and cold as if she had been lying in the snow. She crept closer in, so as to have some shelter from the rain, but the wind howled and crashed in the treetops around her, and the darkness was full of ugly noises. She did not know what things were prowling and shrieking about her. She lay here till the first light of dawn. Then she saw that just below where she lay was a steep drop to the river. The water was dark as pitch and full of drifting ice. Her courage was now quite gone, and she walked back to the manor. It was not far, now that day was dawning. She undressed and lay down in her bed, and so wretched was her state that she thought some mortal sickness would follow her night's wandering, and that would be best. In the morning, Asa said, "How is it your clothes are so wet, foster daughter?" Vigdis answered that she had been out to the byre during the night. There was sickness during the cattle that year, and it was so dark that I could hardly find my way back to the house. Asa asked no more, but merely remarked that Vigdis should have spoken to her. One day Asa said that Vigdis must be sick. Her look was so changed, and she sat drooping on the bench, and she begged her earnestly to confide in her foster mother. But Vigdis answered that she was not to trouble herself about this. Gunnar was ailing that winter, so that not many folk came to the house, and as the season wore on, Asa contrived that there were no other women at Vaden but herself and Vigdis. Vigdis fashioned her a lace garment that she wore under her dress, and for the most part she stayed within doors. Thus it was that no one noticed her state, except Asa, but she dared say nothing. When spring came, Vigdis said that this summer she would live at the Seder with Asa, and so it was agreed, though Gunnar was against it, but Asa at length talked him over. They then left for the forest very early in the season, taking with them a man whose name was Skofte. He was Asa's son, and a freedman of Gunnar. He was to tend the horses and guard the cattle from wild beasts. One day, towards evening, Asa stood at the door of the byre letting in the cows, when Vigdis came up to her in great distress and said, "Here is Gunnar, coming up the hillside. I know not what will happen now. He will surely kill me when he sees how I am now." "Go to your bed," replied Asa. "I will tell him you are sick. He will not stay long." Vigdis did so, and kept her bed the 2 days Gunnar was there. He said it was not to be wondered at that she had fallen sick, or that they were short of milk, seeing how early they had gone to the hills, while the nights were still frosty, and there was little pasture in the woods. But after this, Asa made up her mind that she ought to speak to Vigdis and give her some advice. So she said one day, as the others stood at the bench scouring milk pails, "Let me do that. You must not work so hard now." Vigdis flung her pail to the ground, and her eyes were so wild that they frightened her foster mother. She screamed aloud, "Not a word of that to me, or I know not what I may do to you." After that, Asa never dared speak of the matter to Vigdis, and now summer was wearing off. One night Vigdis got up and left the seder. It was past midsummer. The weather was calm and cloudy. She walked some way over the paddock. When she came to the fence, she could do no more, but had to lie down and wait a while. A dun horse was grazing at the edge of the wood. He did not keep with the rest, but stayed near the houses. He was much petted, and specially fond of Vigdis. He came now and sniffed at her, stood over her as she lay there. When the pangs abated, she stood up and walked along the cattle track. The horse followed her the whole time. Each time the pains came on, she threw her arms around his neck and leaned against him, and then he turned his head, nibbled at her shoulder, and back, and stood quite still. At last she reached a large, dark sheet of water. High up there was a break in the clouds, reflected in the tarn. All else was black and dismal. Once she shrieked loudly, but the echo from the crag on the other side of the lake was so horrible that she was afraid of being heard, and stuffed a corner of her cloak into her mouth. She bit it into little pieces, filling her mouth with shreds of wool, and thought they must choke her. She heard a running brook close at hand, and once, on opening her eyes, she saw that dawn was breaking. Little black wavelets ruffled the tarn, but she could not crawl down to it, and the time wore on miserably for her. The sun came up and began to hurt her eyes. Not long after, Vigdis was delivered. Then she lay for a long time in a swoon, but at last she felt the sun warming her, and she heard the child scream. She looked at it. It was a boy. She shrank from touching it, but took a kerchief she had worn over her head and shoulders. It was white with green stripes, damp with sweat and dew, and stained with blood. She folded it about the child, pushed it in between two stones, and spread moss and twigs over it. Then she made her way to the brook and drank. There was a great bare rock by the side of the water. The sun had warmed it, and Vigdis leaned her back against it, resting there a while. Then she got up and dragged herself home to the seder. There she found Asa in great distress. Skofte had gone out to search for her. Vigdis went in and lay down on her bed. She had fever and was sick, and was very sick for some days. Asa took care of her and rubbed her breasts with warm butter, but neither of them spoke of what had happened. Vigdis would never again go out to the forest, but stayed within doors. Asa could see no signs that she was less sorrowful from before. Late in the summer, the weather grew very warm. The cows did not come home at evening, but lay out in the forest. Asa and Skofte had to make long search over hill and bog to find them and bring them in. Vigdis was loath to be left alone at the seder. She had a dread of the forest and was impatient to go home. She sat most of the day on the threshold looking out. The satyr stood high, with hills and forests on every side, but she had a glimpse of the cultivated land and the fjord in the south. She was sitting there listlessly on one evening, when the dog who lay with his nose in her lap grew restless. He started up and dashed down the meadow barking, but then Vigdis caught sight of a man dismounting and tying his horse to the fence. She was alarmed and rose to her feet, meaning to make for the wood and hide. But at that moment the man turned, and she knew him for Liot. He called out, bidding her not to be afraid. Vigdis stood still in the doorway and answered, "I know well that I have no need to be afraid of you." Liot halted and looked at her for a moment. Then he asked slowly, "What do you mean by that?" Then Vigdis gave an ugly laugh, but made no answer. Liot stood leaning against the doorpost. He looked at the ground and turned up mould with the point of his spear as he spoke to her. "I am now bound for home. There is a ship lying at Tunsberg, owned by my kinsman. I know very well that it is a great boon I ask of you, that you shall forgive me all the wrong I have done you. But so it is, that if you will now go with me, you shall have more honor and greater love than has been given to any woman before you." Vigdis laughed again and answered, "Your promises are of little worth, Liot. You lured me to you once with fair words, and then you brought on me the direst shame and sorrow past bearing. No woman has suffered worse. Great honor, indeed, would be hers whom you took to wife. 'Tis great honor to pick quarrels, to kill folks' horses, and debauch maidens, and make up lies and ballads. And you look to be fit for no other deeds of daring, you ghastly bugbear." Liot looked away as he answered, "It is true that you have good cause to say this to me, but I have performed other and better deeds in the past, and you were once ready to hear of them. Then I did not look at you so ugly that you were not fain to kiss me again and again. But I have had little gladness since we last spoke together, and bitterly have I longed to meet you again. Maybe you thought," asked Vigdis, "that I sat here waiting to see you again?" Then Liot looked up in her face and said yes. After that, neither of them uttered a word for a while. Then he asked again, "Tell me now, Vigdis, whether it be true that I have a child in these parts or not." Vigdis laughed and answered, "That may well be, but I know nothing of it. I have not inquired of your dealings." Liot turned red as a fire and held his peace. Vigdis said, "Now go and make ballads of your manhood and boast of how bold a fellow you are when you are alone with a woman. But do not expect them to believe you hereabouts. No one here takes much account of jealous suitors gossiping." Liot stood silent, not knowing what more to say, nor finding it in his heart to leave her. He saw clearly that she would not change her mind, that there was a small chance of his ever finding her again, and it seemed a grievous thing to lose her. Then he called to mind the priestess's knife. He took it from his bosom and handed it to her, saying, "Do you remember that you dropped this last year, the first time we were at the high place together?" Vigdis took the knife, and with a sudden movement she bent forward and struck at his throat. The blow caught his collar, ripping his clothes and tearing his skin so that the blood flowed. Then Liot seized her and drew her to him for a moment. He said, "Now, Vigdis, I could take you with me, but now I will not act against your will. But come with me, and whatever harm you do me I will repay with good." Vigdis answered in his arms, "You shall not get me alive over the water." He kissed her and said, "Then I wish that much joy may be yours, but I shall never forget my sorrow." Vigdis answered, "May you have the worst of deaths, and live long and miserably, you and all you hold dear. And may you see your children die most wretchedly before your eyes." Liot released her and went down across the meadow. He untied his horse, but then he turned and stood for a while looking up towards the satyr. After that he led his horse into the forest and rode on, and many years passed, and much happened ere he saw Vigdis again. They came home from the satyr in late autumn. That winter again, Vigdis was only moderately well, and she was greatly disquieted when Caer of Grefsen and his kinsmen began to treat with Gunnar that he should marry her to Care. Vigdis begged that the matter might stand over for a time, saying she was unwilling to be married so young. In the end, Gunnar promised Care and answered by autumn, but Vigdis saw that her father had set in his mind on this marriage. Vigdis said she would not dwell at the satyr that summer. One evening in spring, she walked out over the meadows. It was towards sunset and fine weather, just at the time when the birches came into leaf and the birds are singing. There was a pleasant smell of leaves and grass, and Vigdis thought she would walk and try to forget her sorrow. South of the manor dwelt a woman in a little hut. She was married to one of Gunnar's housecarls. She sat on the threshold spinning on a distaff as Vigdis went past, and Vigdis stopped and spoke to her. There was a child crying inside the hut. Vigdis said, "That child cries as though it were in great sorrow. It cannot be very young, for I have noticed that newborn babes scream so horridly, more like a cat or an owl than any human sound." The woman went in and took the child on her arms. It was a little girl of 2 years or more. She was quiet again as soon as her mother had her, and after a while she crawled down and ran about plucking flowers. She was still so small that when she bent down she tripped over her frock and fell. Vigdis picked her up, and then the child gave her flowers she had in her hand, but she had plucked them without stalks, so Vigdis dropped them at once. Then her mother said, "These flowers are called Night and Day. Take one, Vigdis, and give it to me. Then I will tell you your fortune." Vigdis did so, and the other said, "It has first 2 dark petals, and then 2 light. But I see that the lowest petal is light at the center and dark at the edge. That means that at first you will have great sorrows, but afterwards much joy. The dark edge to the last petal is a bad sign. It betokens no good for your old age." Vigdis answered, "That is a bad prophecy, methinks, and I have not asked you to tell my fortune either, but I must reward you nevertheless." With that she took a little filigree brooch from her bosom and gave it to the woman. Then she went on. There was a slab of rock out in the meadow. Around it grew some rowan trees and briars, and the grass below was full of Night and Day. When Vigdis reached it, she sat down, clasped her knee in her hands, and looked out over the fjord, which lay shining grandly in the south, now that the sun had gone behind the hills. She stayed sitting thus for a long time, and little comfort had she in her thoughts, whether she remembered Leal, or called to mind that which she had hidden up in the forest. She had often wondered whether it lay there yet, or whether it was wholly devoured. She remembered clearly that in the place where she had lain that night were many ants and other foul creeping things, and although she had little kindness for the child she had borne, it seemed a horrid thought that the ants might have crawled over it before it was dead. She rose up when darkness was coming on, and walked homeward so quickly that she almost ran. On coming near the manor, she met Asa, who said, "You gave me such a horrid fright, foster daughter. I did not know what to think when you stayed out so long, you who are so afraid of the dark." Vigdis answered, "Afraid of the dark I am now, and of the forest, and afraid at home in my own bower. Wretched is my life, and better were it for me to make an end of it." "Do not say such dreadful things," said Asa. "All may yet be well with you. You are young enough to forget your wrongs, and for aught anyone knows you are a maiden pure. Care loves you, and with him you will have an easy and honorable lot." "That now seems to me the worst of all," replied Vigdis. "I think it were better that my shame were made known openly, even if my father drove me out of his house. There is nothing worse than to be forced to jest and seem merry as I used to be, when I can never turn my head from the misery that has befallen me. And it is no great help to me if they believe me hereabouts to be a pure and undefiled maid, when there are 3 of us who know it is not so. I bear the secret mark of it on my body. I know not how to save myself, now that Care has begun to press his suit." That evening, as they sat alone in the bower, Vigdis took this up again, and said to Asa, "Might you not have a mind, foster mother, to go south to your kinsfolk among the Sounds? You have often said that they were of no meaner birth than our kin here." Asa answered, "I know not whether my kinsfolk be alive or dead, and now it is too late for me to seek them out or change my condition. But why do you ask of this?" Vigdis was silent a long time, but at last she said, "In old days, whenever I was sorrowful, I would go to you and sit on your lap. But now it has come about that I am more secret with you, Asa, than with any other." Asa made no answer, and the other spoke again. "I now regret that I set out that child, for every night it wakes me with such horrid screaming. But evil fortune should harden my heart, as I would have it." "What do you mean by that? What mean you by that?" asked Asa. "It were my best revenge," replied Vigdis, "if Liolt's son became Liolt's slayer. Not lightly would he escape from the dog I reared with hate and blows, till he had his teeth in Viga Liolt's throat." Then Asa said in a very low voice, "Now I would fain know whether you mean that." "I do so," replied Vigdis, and her foster mother went on. "Then it is best I tell you that the boy you bore last summer is with Skofte, my son." Vigdis rose from the bench on which she sat. She stood for a moment speechless and pale as a corpse. Then she flung herself down and wept with her head on the table. Asa said, "None need get to know of it, and my advice is that it be kept hidden as before, but I have told you in case you desire to see your son." But Vigdis lay lamenting and said, "I thought I was already so unhappy that my life could not be made worse, but now I can no longer bear to live in these parts. When I know that boy is here, and my eyes may light upon him. 'Twas bad luck, I was so tired and wretched I had not the strength to throw him into the lake. I do not believe you have told me the truth." Then Asa went to her chest, took out a linen cloth, and handed it to Vigdis. She looked at it. It was the same she had on that night. It still bore the stains of blood, and moss and wood and mold clung to the folds. She flung it to the floor and said, "Now my father will know all. I will not live if I have to beg Skofte or any other to keep my secret. Never did I think you would fail me so badly." Asa answered, "When I awoke that morning and you were not in your bed, I was frightened and bade Skofte search for you. He found the boy and picked him up. We thought him so handsome a child that Skofte offered to rear him. But I have told you this because I thought it might console you somewhat to hear you had the fairest child alive." "Well, now it must turn out as it may," said Vigdis, "for I am weary of this life." Asa answered, "You must not do this. Honorable worth is of little avail. She who has to bear a shame will be brought low. That has been my fate, as I shall tell you. Afterwards you must make your choice." Asa then told her story. "My father's name was Harold Goldbeard, and he dwelt south in Sealand. Often have I told you of my childhood, how bright and happy was the life we led, I and my sisters. They were fully grown, Ingrid and Astrid, but I was 13. When one evening we went with our serving maids down to the Sound and bathed. Some ships came sailing past. They were Vikings from Holland. They landed and took us on board. Not one of us was able to escape. 3 brothers owned the ships, and they took us 3 sisters for themselves. They saw at once which of the maids were of gentle birth. Arngrim was the name of the eldest. I lay with him the first night, and after that he had me for 2 years. The brothers soon parted. The others made for home, but Arngrim roamed over the sea, winter and summer. He was a brave, strong man, and handsome. But he treated me harshly because I would never show him affection. My sisters I have never seen since, nor heard what became of them. For Arngrim would not answer me when I asked for news of them. He sailed far and wide, and won many victories. He kept me in a room below the deck, fearing I might escape. He took my clothes from me, but gave me great store of costly skins and coverlets and jewels. There was a Danish lad on board, whose name was Abshorn. I enticed him to fly with me, taking all the gold, but Arngrim got to know of it. He slew Asbjorn, and after that he treated me even worse. One time, as we lay under the southern isles, some Vikings from Norway laid their ships alongside, and then Arngrim fell. Gunnar, your father, was their chief. When he led me out of the cabin, I went to where Arngrim lay dead on the deck. I knelt down and washed my hair in the blood that flowed from him, remembering how Arngrim used to tie my hair about his neck at night. Never had I a more grateful washing. Then Gunnar asked me my name, and of what kindred I was. For, said he, I can see you are as well born as you are beautiful. After that, we talked together that day and that night. Gunnar promised to carry me home to Denmark. He gave me the best of clothes, suited to my station, and showed me such kindness that he won my affection. He said he wished he were parted from his wife. Then he would accept me at the hands of my kinsmen. But I would rather stay with him than go home. I was with him in his ship till I was with child. Then he loved me even more, for Alvzal was childless. He brought me hither to Vaden, but then the earl summoned the thanes to arms, and Gunnar had to leave me. He bade Alvzal take good care of me and of the child, as though it were her own. Then we parted, and I was left behind with unspeakable sorrow and longing. Alvzal and her foster mother were with me when I gave birth to a son. They took the child from me at once and had it set out, but forced all the household to tell Gunnar it was stillborn. And Alvzal promised me the cruelest of deaths if I made complaint. Afterwards tidings came that Gunnar was sorely wounded and could not be expected home for a long time. Then Alvzal had me taken to the house where her thralls lived. One of them was named Svart. He defended me against the rest, and was good to me in other ways, but he took me to wife. Alvzal gave him a house here in the forest, where Skofte now lives, and she let it be known to all that now I was the wife of the thrall. When Gunnar came home, she told him that I had gone to Svart, and at this Gunnar was so angry that he was about to kill us both. But I told him about the boy she had exposed, and all the rest. Then he drove Alvzal out of the house, and bade me leave Svart and come and rule his house. But I advised him rather to take a new wife. So he married Herdis, your mother, and she was younger and handsomer than I. As you know, she died when you were born. Then I asked Gunnar to let me have the nurturing of you, and this he granted. Since then I have had charge of the house, as you have seen, and Gunnar cared well for my sons, and gave them their freedom. In all things he has acted by me for the best, so long as I have known him. Vigda said, Of all you have told me, it seems most strange that you stayed with the thrall in whose power they placed you. I should have begged Gunnar to have him torn asunder by wild horses. Asa answered, It was more honorable for Gunnar to take a rich and high-born wife than to keep me in his house. But what swayed me most was that I had Svart's child. I would not have them take my son from me a second time. Your nature is not as mine, foster mother, said Vigdis. After a moment she went on. 'Twas no great joy he had of my mother either, and still less will it be when he hears I have his child. Let the boy bide where he is, while Gunnar is alive, said Asa. Afterwards you can take him to you and find comfort in him. We shall find some way to deal with care. Vigdis folded her hands in her lap and looked down into the fire. I have no heart to go on living in sorrow and dread, trying to hit upon a way, she said. Rather will I take the worst that may come, and it can hardly be worse than what I have to bear now. She took up the wrapping, went to the door, and called to a man who was chopping wood in the yard. Take this cloth to Skofte, she ordered, and tell him he is to come hither this night and give me back that which he found with the handkerchief. After that she went back and seated herself by the hearth. Asa sat opposite. For a long time they did not speak. Then said Asa, It will be late ere Skofte can be here. It were best we went to bed. "Go then and lie down," replied Vigdis. Asa said nothing and did not move. After a while, Vigdis said again, "Go you to bed now, Asa." Her foster mother could hear by her voice that it was inadvisable to thwart her, so she went and lay down, but she did not sleep. Vigdis stayed up. She did not move except to put wood on the fire whenever it was dying down. And so the night wore away, till the cocks began to crow. After a time there was a knock at the door. "Go, Asa, and open," Vigdis ordered. Asa did so, and Skofte came in. He carried the boy on his arm, wrapped in a pelt. Vigdis rose, took a torch of pine, and lighted it. Skofte uncovered the child and held it to the light when it began to scream, for it had slept till now. Vigdis looked at the boy a moment, but did not touch him. He was small and thin for his age, with long dark hair and light blue eyes. He was very like Leon. Skofte put him down on the floor, for he wanted to show that the boy could already stand on his feet if one held him, but he could not walk. He cried the whole time and clung to his foster father's clothes. Vigdis threw the torch upon a hearth and sat down as before. Skofte said, as the boy would not keep quiet, "He cries because he is sleepy. In other ways he is as good as can be." "Then lay him down," replied Vigdis, "or he will wake the whole house." Asa took him in her arm and was carrying him to the bed, when Vigdis said, "I will not have him here. You must find another place for him. And you, Skofte, are to go to the hall and lie down. I shall reward you for this, more than that boy is worth." Asa laid the child on the bench and herself beside him. Vigdis remained silent, sitting up all night.